What's that? What was it? I suppose it's called Linda's home now. Which is? Oh. She kind of did her own thing in her eyes.
Number 9. Yeah,
That's good.
Okay, what money is it in Canby? Okay, our facility, what is it in the park? Like Sure Mouse. Is that trying to do that? Absolutely. Yeah, I'll just Google Village Canby and.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I can do that.
You are, but you know, you can probably.
Did you put it back on the picture in here?
There's one there from the other. We got 18 here.
do we know when Kathy's going to be here?
All right.
Thank you for taking care of that. Yeah.
Okay, we're ready to get rolling.
All right.
So, reminder, we're on this week. No class next week because we've got the semi-annual meeting, which will happen right after service. And then I plan on spending the last Sunday in August. That's July. And the first 2 Sundays in August, also looking at this document. It's long, and we're not going to exhaustively study this because, well, for a couple reasons we'll talk about in a bit, but I'm just kind of giving you a sense of the calendar to come. And then we're going to take most of August off after that because I'm going to be gone. We'll pick back up again. Usually it's the second Sunday in September. We're trying to create a little kind of like God's Work Our Hands Sunday for that second Sunday in September. The Sunday after Labor Day, but more to come on that. But in the meantime, yeah. So we're looking at the document in progress, the social statement in progress. How many of you have spent any time with any of the other ELCA social statements? Familiar with? How much do you know about how these are created? Not much. Not much. I'll just hit a couple of highlights. One of the most important things to understand about these social statements is they are not written by clergy. Okay? This is one of the common misconceptions is that what happens is a bunch of elite elite pastors from in the White Tower get together and craft these social statements that are meant to tell ELCA congregations what they should believe. Okay? That is as far from reality as you could possibly get. These are documents that have been created usually over a rather long time period. These take years, not weeks or months. These take years to put together. There are committees that are formed. Usually there's an overall committee, a church-wide committee that's responsible for ultimately for the construction of these documents. But then there will be region-wide committees, teams, and sometimes synod-wide teams whose jobs are to take these rough documents and engage their synods, engage their congregations with them in order to solicit feedback to the document creating team. And this is why these things take years, because they might come up with an original draft statement and then they try it out. They bounce it off of congregations. They let congregations study it, which is why we get access to something that's not even technically published yet. Because the intent is that this isn't coming out of a void, it's not coming out of the White Tower. It's a document that represents as best as we can possibly do what we, as all of the congregations of the ELCA, believe. Right? And again, it's on one hand, this document, or it's an idea that encapsulates or represents what we believe or how we feel as congregations of the ELCA. They're also aspirational documents as well too. They're meant to be teaching. They're meant to say, here's where we feel Jesus is calling us towards. right? So like, the example that I think everybody is familiar with, at least in some regards, is the 2009 Social Statement on Human Sexuality, right? And that very much was a document that said, here, we have talked to congregations across the breadth of the ELCA. Here's the feedback that we've gotten on these specific issues. Here is language that represents the concerns of the congregation, and yet here is the recommendation, or here are the ideas that we're pushing forward for recommending how congregations can change and grow in following Jesus. In that specific scenario, it recommended several things, but one of which was full acceptance of partnered LGBTQ folks as clergy within the ELCA, right? Which was a change in recommendation, a change in polity from how it was done before, okay? What we're going to look at today is a similar document insofar as that it's not necessarily affecting what we do as ELCA Lutherans in terms of our church polity, but it's attempting to maybe encourage us in our civic responsibility, but specifically as is informed by our faith. Does that make sense? So it's not attempting to tell you how to be an American. It's encouraging you to think about what it means to be a Lutheran American. Okay? Okay, let me show you. And I forgot to send Kit the link to put in the email this week, and I apologize. I shouldn't have done that. But if you want to access the document on your device right now, I'll show you again, and I will send you the link out this week. You go to elca.org, you click on the Faith tab, and over on this right-hand column, you go to Current Social Writing Projects. If you want to look at any of the social statements that came before, they're all here. I'll show you that real quick. And there's a lot of them, okay? Okay, this isn't everybody's cup of tea, right? It can be a little bit dry. They're long, right? They're anywhere from 30 to 80 pages, these documents. But if you ever get a chance, I would highly encourage you to just, even if you just skim through some of these are all fantastic statements. And I would even argue they are statements that are profoundly, and I hesitate to use the language forward-thinking, but they're profoundly considerate of the scope and the breadth of human experience, I guess is the way to put it. I will also point out that we have social statements, but then we also have social messages, which are messages that are from our church-wide leadership to different topics. And those also are fantastic reads. Particularly, the ones I would encourage you to read are these latest four: human rights, government, climate, and gun-related violence. They're all pretty good. But what you want to go to is, again, we're on elca.org. You click on the Faith tab. You go over to Current Social Writing Projects, and that's where it is. And they don't give you they don't put a big button that says click here. You have to read down a little bit, and it says a social statement on faith and civic life is scheduled to be considered by blah, 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 blah. To learn more about this social statement project, go to elca.org/civics and faith, and then to read the text that will be considered by the voting members of the church-wide assembly, click here, and then that will download the document. Okay. But again, I will remember this week to send the link out with the weekly email so that you can get it in an immediate process. But here we are. Okay. Let me see if I can zoom in. I can. Okay. Any questions so far about social statements or anything? Before we start reading, let me just ask you a couple questions. Did you all get a civics class or its equivalent sometime when you were going to school? Yeah, good on you. What did that look like?
8th grade, Arizona. History. It looked like, you already had a federal government overview, and this is the state government overview.
And kind of how counties were set up, how cities were set up, mine included that.
Cool. Any other experiences? Did they talk about civic responsibility at all? What was that like? Can you remember? How did you guys learn to vote?
Mock elections.
You had mock elections.
I turned 18 when the law changed,
Yeah.
and we threw out our school board. That's exactly what happened.
You're a rebel.
Oh, no, it was led by half the faculty in high school.
Oh, you mean the rebellion?
Yeah, I didn't.
This is fascinating to me because I got none of that. Yeah, in the 1980s and 1990s, I had history classes. They were electives. So where my mandatory history stopped was in 8th grade. So I had, I had like U.S. history in 7th grade, and then world history in 8th grade, and that was about it. And then I had a lot of elective history courses in high school. I took a class called Michigan Alpena History, which was very, very local. I don't remember a darn thing about that class, except that some friends of mine and I made a video about hunting Sasquatches in the sinkholes of Northeast Michigan. I have no idea why that was relevant to the class at all, but I remember it was a ton of fun. I don't ever remember having any general civics education. Broad overviews of these are the 3 branches of government, that kind of stuff. That was about it. We learned the parts of American history that every American learns, which is why we're the best, right? So we learned about the Revolutionary War, kind of skimmed through the Civil War, and we learned about World War II. That was about it. Didn't spend much time in World War I. Didn't learn about Vietnam. Jim.
Looking at the Boy Scout thing, Indian guys, Cub Scout, Boy Scout, and very civic.
Yes.
Oriented.
Yes. Did not have Boy Scouts in Lachine, Michigan.
Yeah, the Boy Scout, there were several merit badges.
Yeah.
And several awards you can work towards that are all about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, one is called Pro Deo et Patria from Lutheran.
Huh.
Our classes used to be called Rights and Responsibilities.
Rights and responsibilities. Matt.
So when I went to a Catholic school for grade school, and we would say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah.
And up until the 1950s, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States.
Yeah. Then under God.
And the under God was not in there.
Yeah.
And that was introduced by an act of Congress by our congressman,
Yeah.
Louis Rabel.
Yeah.
And he got that through. He was very influential, one of these members of Congress that had been in office for maybe 30 years or something.
Yeah.
And he was the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee at the time.
Yeah.
Very well known. In fact, his family lived about 3 blocks from where we live, and his grandchildren are good friends of mine. And so it's like when that got in there, we were just thinking, you know what? We made a real difference in this. Our congressman made a real difference in this country. Now it seems like a small thing in a way, but kind of in a way, it's reflective of how sort of incremental changes can be made in the way we look at ourselves as Americans.
Yeah.
And stuff gets done. Now, not everybody agrees with that. I told that story once through a colleague of mine at work, maybe 5-10 years ago, and she was really actually down on that. She said, "No, we shouldn't be saying that."
Yeah.
But I mean, that's
It's
how
great.
things get done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, every high school has a pamphlet called Rights and Responsibilities. I always thought it should be turned around, responsibilities and then rights.
Do those pamphlets still
But
exist?
sometimes we get so involved in our rights, we forget that we have responsibilities.
Yeah. Andrea, you?
Well, I just had a comment about, your experience being so different from some of
Yeah.
us. So is that a difference in the state you grew up in?
I have no idea.
Or is it a generational change?
I suspect it's generation.
It is a generation.
And the reason I suspect this is, and this is more of I don't have data to back this up. This is a qualitative kind of interpretation of watching my generation and successive generations be completely ignorant of any of this. of why voting is a responsibility, not a right, what it means to participate in any government. But more than that, even the basic question of what is government. And one of the things that I've witnessed is this viewpoint of government as being other. Government is them. And even for folks who trend on the liberal progressive end of supporting what the government is doing, it's still other. It's still them. It's still they, right? As opposed to government being us, we the people, we the people, we the people, which is one of the statements you're going to hear repeated in this over and over and over again.
I can tell you one other story that I think is appropriate to this. So, in the first time, about your voting question, the first time I voted was in the 1964 election.
Yeah.
And I was in the Army in Germany. And I mean, we were face to face with the Soviets there. And you don't think about being stationed in West Germany as being a particularly tough duty, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty nice as things worked out. But they actually had a class on voting.
Yeah.
And they put together
That's great.
like a workshop. And we were all able to, we had to go get our absentee ballots, have them sent to us, and they kind of walked us through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then, that was the first time I voted for Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
I did 64.
That's
It
cool.
was pretty great the way I thought that the Army took the initiative to make sure these young, I was 20,
Yeah.
maybe 21 at the time. And it was I was pretty impressed by the way they did that.
They understood. Yeah.
Yeah, these are citizen soldiers. We're going to get them to vote.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was in Italy in high school, and so I must have missed when we moved back to the States. There was nothing like civics in the high school I attended. And I learned how a bill is done by the electric company. I'm just the bill.
Yeah.
I learned how that, and from that. And my first voting, I must be older than Paul because I was 21, and it was not a presidential year, and I thought I had researched what needed to be researched. And then when I got the ballot, I was just shocked that there were all these judge positions,
Yeah.
these minor ones that
Yeah.
I had no idea about.
And what are you supposed to do with those? You don't know the candidates,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
This is where, I wish I had somebody to hold my hand. Is there somebody else that
As a junior in high school, I went to what they call Boy State.
What was it?
Boy State.
Boy State.
What you did is you actually had all these people from all the schools, and you actually established the government,
That's right.
and did all this work. Brenda went to the state.
Yeah.
She went as a junior as well.
Sure. I've heard several stories, and it's all from people older than me. Maybe these exist. I'm guessing maybe in like New England or DC areas.
Listen to Laura, because I
Sure.
was the same age and she went to Boy State.
I went to Boy State in Arizona. Back when the American Legion put it on.
Okay. That
And
makes
the
sense.
American Legion was a much more robust organization, just like the ALC was.
Yeah.
All those organizations were much
Yeah.
more robust,
Institutions.
much more involved.
Yeah.
And, well, it depends on where you grow up, really. I mean, Sarah and I grew up in a military community, and for instance, it wasn't in the civics class per se, but your parents could come and talk about what they do, and so one of my classmates' parents was a colonel who came and talked to us about infrastructure and hearts and minds in Vietnam and all that. And it was very informative for an 8th grader to go, why would you fight for a group of people who don't know what they themselves want?
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting stuff. But I got to get that, just like we got the sheriff from Bisbee came over and gave a class in identifying marijuana and stuff. He brought us in.
I had that. It was called drug abuse resistant education.
Right. But you get exposed to a lot of stuff depending on where you are
And that's what I'm learning too.
What the
really
protocol
depends on where you grew up. Yeah. But I have. Go ahead.
I was just going to add the comment. There was Girls State.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
right, there was.
There was.
I think they don't think they have that now. They have the whole everybody.
Just kids state.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is what I'm discovering in my adulthood is that your mileage may vary depending on where you grew up and what township, which school district, etc., what resources were available to your school district. But I have noticed a trend with successive generations that those kind of things are less available. And I don't know why. I don't know if there was concerted effort to remove these things from schools, or simply, as you pointed out, Paul, the institutions which supported them just aren't around anymore. Because it wasn't necessarily, it sounds like, school districts that were pushing this or being motive force. A lot of times it was things like the American Legion or the Army or whatever that were encouraging this kind of stuff.
Jesse, though, my granddaughter that just graduated from Grant High School, I mean, first of all, she's extremely smart, but they took a deep dive into civics.
Yeah.
And also into sort of practical day-to-day economics.
Yeah.
How to run your checkbook, how to take care of loans, this kind of stuff. And I was really impressed. I thought, you tend to think, especially here in Oregon, you kind of wonder about the education kids get. Yeah. But if you look at her and her friends, you think
things are going right there.
Yeah, these young people are pretty much set to go out into the world.
Yeah. And one thing that I think is happening as well, and I think a lot of it is student inspired, is that there is a renewed call for this kind of education in up and coming young people, which is great. Yeah.
Our granddaughter, who's a senior this fall, is taking an online course through Brigham Young University on civics.
Yeah.
And something else. Do you remember the other topic? But it has, I think it relates to it. And she went to the Model United Nations.
I always want, after I found out about that, when it was far too late, that sounded like the coolest thing in the world. I would have enjoyed that. And I think too, and I know that Leif and I are similar ages, and I don't know what his experience was, but I wonder if being millennials or, if the lack of that for us has inspired us to want to encourage our children. Texting handle that.
Two of my daughters who are about your age were in the We the People program, and then usually there's an article every spring when they have the competition, and it was an amazing program to learn about the history of the United States and the government. And there were about, 20-some kids, and they were each divided into a unit. One did a deep dive on the Federalist Papers and the origination of the Constitution. One did the Bill of Rights. One did, what the head. I don't know all the specifics of the other groups because it sort of depended on what my daughter did. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's not all the kids.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing program, and it does seem to be, it is sponsored by an outside group, and it usually lawyers who get involved who are very invested in that.
I don't know if anybody saw the news this year, but what's the big high school over on the west side that Lincoln. Yeah. So Lincoln sends a team to DC every year.
That's where they win.
And they win. But this year was different because there was a school, two kids from Newburgh, I want to say?
Sprague High School in
Salem, that went, and they ended up co-winning. It's the first time it's ever happened because they miscounted the scores and ended up giving a goal. But the articles in the Oregonian is probably archived somewhere if you want to read it. It was fascinating because the two teams ended up bonding. Because you got two kids from Sprague and then this team of 15 or 20 from Lincoln. And it was super cool.
So things like Model UN were very important. My years. For instance, I represented South Yemen once.
Oh wow!
Yeah, we were our high school was late in getting that country.
I was gonna say I think it's just Yemen now, isn't it?
Right.
It would have been just Sudan, which is now.
But you have to actually research the country that you're coming to. We went to the U of A in Tucson to have the event, and the event was over a weekend.
That's cool.
And it was a very large deal.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard a lot about Model UN of late.
Well, and I would say too, what I'm hearing from a lot of folks is depending on, which socioeconomic background you came from, which school you went to, has a lot to do with determining the amount of civic education that you've got. And I can speak from experience that the kids from my high school was huge. We had a 2,000 student high school. So it was the entire county of Alpena that went to this high school. The kids that ended up going into, the kids that were the most politicals were all lawyers' kids. I knew several of them, and coincidentally, these were the same kids that ended up going to U of M law school or business school, or, that has nothing to do with it. My experience of voting, the first election I ever voted in was the 2000 presidential election. I turned 18 in May of 2000, voted in the presidential election, and then got to witness the hanging Chad debacle. Which really kind of affected my perspective. And I'll just, this probably isn't a shock to you, but both of my mom's side of the family, my dad's side of the family, were all TFL Democrats. They're all Democratic Farm Labor. So you can probably, suspect who I voted for based on that, which really kind of colored my perspective on civic participation for a little bit. But that has been something that I have, and this isn't me patting myself on the back, I've taken a lot of responsibility for in my own life, is making sure I vote in every election. But it's because my mom took me to the voting, to the, it was a elementary school, I think it is, something, or a library, I can't remember. Took me there, brought me through the line, and then literally took me to the booth and said, you go there, I'm gonna go here, I'll talk to you when we're done. Did not influence my decision at all, right? Didn't tell me who to vote for, but made sure that I went and voted, and that made the difference. And there are a lot of kids who don't have that experience.
Jesse, I really got a lot out of what Scott had to say.
Yeah, oh yeah, and Scott actually feels guilty. He's like, is it okay if I take Sunday off? He's like, I worked 6 days already this week. Yes, Scott, I'm not paying you for this.
In the heat of the Milwaukie Fest, he was.
And he was
busy.
working.
He was working nonstop.
Exactly.
Yeah, Scott, and I want to say too, I already told him this personally. I would love to have him come back and talk about that stuff. I find it fascinating as somebody who is a transplant into this community, getting to know where I am, right? Not just geographically, but understanding that this isn't just a place on the map, right? Does that make sense when I say that? Yeah. That this is a place with people who have a history that, was founded intentionally, all this stuff that we learned about. And I was remarking to somebody that the piece I found most fascinating and most encouraging, discouraging at the same time was the consolidation stuff in the 1980s, where there was this really optimistic idea of like, let's provide all these services and resources for all these other communities. And they're like, we don't want to pay the extra taxes. I'm like, okay, I get that. I get that. Anyways.
It would just be interesting to know if he ever gets invited to speak to like local classes.
He gives that pitch, or that spiel, several times. I don't know if it's schools, but I know that PowerPoint that he shares, he modified it a little bit for this group, but he gives that on a regular basis. He said we were more attentive than his usual audiences.
Yeah. He showed us a picture of his predecessor teaching a group of kids.
Yeah.
In the, it looked like the early 60s, late 50s.
The girls all had
their Girl Scout
uniforms on. It was the school.
So I got to share this with you. When we were at camp, the question came up. Somebody here asked him, what would you be doing in 5 years or something like that? And it came up in a similar context. And so he shared with me after the fact, he's like, I love what I do. I was talking about how I ended up doing this and how I didn't really intend to be in the pastor role. I kind of meandered, whatever. And he's like, no, I pretty much knew what I wanted to do from the moment I graduated high school. He's like, I am exactly where I want to be, and I hope I never have to leave. Good for you, man.
But that came through in his talk too.
Yes. He loves this. All right. Okay, Paul.
Well, I just wanted to say, I think that I feel like I've noticed that there's greater and greater specialization in every aspect of life.
Yeah.
And greater and greater concentration of folks who are considered experts, and then the rest of us who are the hoi polloi.
Yeah.
Don't matter as much, so to speak. And I think that's a part of growing cynicism. Maybe it's always been cynical and I didn't know it, but it just seems like, the hanging Chad is a good example of people just thinking that we've become a banana republic, kind of thing. I just remember a lot more reverence for the civic, what I call the civil religion.
Yeah.
And was noticing that yesterday with the Masons did a thing as they opened the time council. The Masons came in. I've never been in a Masonic ceremony before, and I thought, okay, people don't get how this fits a niche in the life of many people who are not, say, familiar with Christian ritual and liturgy, and
It's alternative sacred space.
it's alternative sacred space that's well occupied
Yeah.
by a group of people, and absolutely mysterious to the rest of us.
Well, and I think this is something that for whatever reason has been absent from our public consciousness. Is, as people of faith, we put trust in a greater power, something bigger than ourselves. That can be your nation as well too, and it can be that in a healthy way. It doesn't have to be unhealthy. Where it gets unhealthy is when you start confusing the two. But the idea of participating in something bigger than yourselves is government, right? That's what it means to live in a civilization, to be part of a state.
Well, and to segue on that, I think that's true of so many areas in life. Look at the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And how many people, especially women, are just totally disillusioned with
Sure.
the patriarchy
Sure.
in that. And I think it does have something to do with the massive communication. I mean, in the past, we weren't as familiar, and, reading is a lot different than being bombarded with
Yes.
messages from radio, television, and now it's all even made up by much of it is made up by AI, and it comes through your devices that you look at 6 hours a day.
Or
And
in,
it's
yeah.
sort of inevitable that people catch on. I mean, it's not like humans were any better back then in the Revolutionary War.
Oh, and I think in terms of
Bad things,
in
but-
terms of like understanding the information that you get, there's no longer any distinction between opinion and reporting. It's all become just this one kind of amalgam, which is how many. This is stark.
I read it and it's true.
Yeah, or is anybody familiar with Joe Rogan, who that is?
Yeah.
Maybe, okay.
Joe Rogan
He is the number one influence on young men between the ages of 18 and 35.
Yeah.
Okay, and he's a former UFC fighter.
Yeah.
So it's not to impugn his intelligence, but it is to say that this is who we trust, right? Okay, and that's just an example, because the reality is that a lot of what is given to us as reporting, as media, is opinion that is presented as fact. And it's just a crazy world. It's really tough, and not to mention that there are influencers. I don't know if you understand how that world works, but for young people navigating the world, and it's got negative and it's got positive consequences. The negative consequences is this complete disillusionment with information in general, right? The idea of doing your own research is kind of going by the wayside, in that a lot of young people just distrust authorities and institutions in general because they're all suspicious. On the other hand, it's made them suspicious. It's made folks suspicious and curious and driven them to want to investigate and understand and not to be, take everything that's spoon-fed to them. But, we were having this conversation with our junior high kids. It's just, what a world you've got to learn to navigate. And it's so much more complicated than the world that I grew up in, where and this is come across in the sermon a little bit today, I grew up trusting authority for the most part. I have a natural suspicion of it because my father was a Vietnam veteran. but by and large, I look to institutions and authorities as beneficial. I'm a white male, that makes a difference as well too. My skin was darker, I might have had a different experience. But
My oldest son, I think it was, had a class when he was in high school, actually it was given by Laura Schroeder's sister-in-law, and it was on critical thinking.
Yeah.
And, I think that was a really excellent course. Some of the stuff that he was.
I took a logic class in community college, and it was one of the most fascinating things I ever did. Where it really shook my worldview was the written intent of the class was to improve your intelligence. What do you call that? IQ was to improve your IQ, right? And the guy that taught it told us up front, you're not going to be any smarter by the time you're done with this class. You're just going to be better at taking that test. And we did. I improved my IQ score by like 20 points. It was ridiculous. Yeah. And it was all about learning these logic puzzles. And this is pretty forward thinking for a class being taught in Alpena County, Northeast Michigan. Is he then talked to us about how we as middle class white folks have an advantage over so many different demographics, and how that IQ score has been historically used to basically dehumanize people because they couldn't take this test now. Anyways, then I'm gonna.
Well, I think prejudice can work both ways.
Sure.
Sometimes if I'm looking at a game show on TV and there's a black person and a white person, and then I hope the black person wins because in my mind I'm thinking he's had a worse time, harder time than me. May not be true, but that's what I think.
Wait until you hear the sermon this morning. This is what we're talking. Well, it's the Good Samaritan. So we're going to be talking about who are our neighbors. Yeah. All right. Let me dig into this so we can spend like 20 minutes, talking about this, launch into it. So, with all social statements, what happens is they give you the annotated guide to the content up front, which is basically they go through each of the headings for all of the different sections, and they give you basically a 1 or 2 line introduction. And notice it's not intended to summarize. This is right at the top. The following annotation do not summarize each article. Provide a reference to the article's content. Does that make sense? Do I have to explain that? And the reason we're starting with this is because I want us to, if we get through nothing but this annotated guide, great, because then we will at least have an understanding of what's in this document. And these are all pretty good conversation start-offs anyways. So if we get a chance to get in-depth in any one of these, we can. I would encourage you as we go through these kind of headings to think about ones that you want to talk about. And then next week, you say, hey, I want to talk about this one, we'll jump to that one. Does that make sense? But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through these slowly. We're going to pause between if you want to have a conversation about any of them. And we're going to talk about, what this document is intended to do. Okay, so the introduction. So Article 1. Your will be done on earth as in heaven. These familiar words from the Lord's Prayer remind Christians that God is at work in caring for all creation. And they, the words, call us to strive to understand and join in that work. This social statement provides a comprehensive Lutheran view of civic life toward that purpose. Any questions or comments on that one? I would just draw your attention to a couple of words in there that are important. All creation, could be underlined there. Strive to understand and join in that work. Okay. And then, of course, it's the comprehensive Lutheran view.
Strive is the key word.
Strive. Yep. Okay, here we go. So that was the introduction. We're in section 1. Foundational teaching. God acts for the well-being of all through civic life, which was stated in the introduction. I should have brought this up last week because it would have fit in with my sermon so well. The scriptures teach that all power arises from God and that God's purpose is shalom, the well-being of all creation. For human beings, this means that all our activity is accountable to God's power and purpose. Underline this part. And that no earthly power should replace God as the aim of our trust and purpose. This is why this is a uniquely Lutheran, and I would say Christian Lutheran statement. I don't know if this translates well to people that are secular, that don't have necessarily faith background or faith identity. Do you understand what this is saying? It's creating a hierarchy, sort of, but it's creating a priority, which is saying that we trust and believe and put our faith in God, first and foremost, and I would say only. Everything else is not subservient, but secondary to that. What would be included in secondary to that?
Human government.
Human government. Partisan identity. Geography, regional identity, right? Sports team affiliation. I don't bring that up accidentally. I bring it up because so much of politics is not at all dissimilar from sports team affiliation. I had a wonderful conversation with somebody yesterday about the fact that they were an Oregon household. The same way I would hear somebody say I'm a Republican or a Democratic household. We're an Oregon household. And one of our family members disagrees that he's just a contrarian. I'm not critiquing that. That's cool. That's, being part of something bigger than yourself. This is why, like the Portland Timbers fan club has been such a great thing for a lot of people. I have friends of my brothers that actually run, I can't remember what it's called, the Portland Timbers fan team or whatever. It's like, it's a part of their life, But what this statement is saying is that all those things are secondary to our faith and trust in God. Okay. Stop me if you want to talk about this stuff. From the first chapters of Genesis onward, the scriptures make clear that all human beings bear the image of God. I mean, this sounds so basic, but so important. All human beings bear the image of God. We talked about this. Which includes being social and political creatures. Have you ever considered that your political identity is part and parcel of your vocation as being a creation of the divine? And this is important because we do this weird thing where in the United States we blend faith and government, and then we make these claims that they're separate. And adamantly, don't bring politics into the pulpit, but at the same time, in God we trust, For civic life, this means that all people are called to participate in God's work of fostering the well-being of creation through social and political communities. Have you ever considered that participating in as your responsibility as a civilian, as a citizen of the United States, that you're called to participate in the politics of this nation are actually fostering the well-being of creation? Do you think that's true? I mean, this statement is making this. It's making a statement, but we don't have to. It's a rough draft. If you disagree, let's talk about it, or you can just think about it. But again, the scriptures teach that human sin warps the image of God that every human bears. Human sin includes distorting God's gift of society through individual practices, institutions, and systems, so that they are not used for the common good of all neighbors. This seems like rather innocuous language. It's kind of profoundly critiquing our current stuff, okay? In saying that when you use government, politics, or whatever to exclude, you are sinning. That is what this statement is claiming, okay?
That's why women got rights.
That's an amen, sister. Amen. Yeah, women's suffrage, part of God's good creation, right? We make that claim. The civil rights movement, part of fostering God's good creation. Yeah. Lutherans teach that as God comes to us, humans come to know both their sin and God's many, many gifts. What does this mean for us as Christians? God's response to sin includes the gift of law, God's directives, and gospel, God's grace revealed in Christ. This is very Lutheran. Which are both strategies God uses to seek the well-being of humanity and all creation. Article 6. People of faith approach the present world with trust in God and at the same time with measured realism and humility about human efforts to create a just society. God's people live in the now, but not yet, of God's reign and know that no person, community, or society is without sin. For civic life, this means that Christians are called to both engage in bringing about a better world and be vigilant in regard to any earthly arrangement. If you guys want to read the advanced version of this, read Bonhoeffer's Ethics. Specifically, I can't remember which chapter it is, but it's State and Church is the name of the chapter. He dives into this. In fact, I didn't know this in the You could summarize a lot of this in Bonhoeffer's responsibilities of the church to the state, which he has 3 of them. One is to make sure that the state does what it says it's going to do, right? So as the United States of America, we the people, right? We the people claim that all human beings, all people, are given specific rights, rights and responsibilities. So one of the church's responsibility is to underline that all and make sure that the state understands their responsibility to all citizens of the United States, okay? Number 2 is to care for the people that are hurt, because government is big, it is bulky, it is a ship that takes a long time to steer, and it either is going to leave people out or hurt people, not because it's necessarily evil, but because it's human. And so our responsibility as church is to care for the people that are wounded. So that's generally the people at the margins that don't fit inside the big picture. And then 3 is, of course, when the government refuses to be the government, or when it harms the church, is you shove a stick in the spokes of the wheels. And so the language he uses is you seize the wheel, but that confuses people because they think by seize that the church takes control of the wheel. It means the opposite, which is you stop the wheel from turning. So our job as church is to basically shut it all down, is to turn it off and back on again, to use a modern metaphor. So a lot of what is being said here, I can represent that. Again, stop me if you want to talk about this. Article 7. Christians and Christian church structures, too, are subject to sin and, too often, have failed to prioritize efforts toward the common social good. For participation in civic life at this time, this means that Christ's church should acknowledge the need to repent for the harm caused by past and present action or inaction, and should strive to take appropriate actions today. Such accountability is an important condition of striving toward the common good. Striving, again, toward the common good and well-being of creation. Where have we seen this historically in the church? When have we failed to prioritize efforts toward the common social good?
Well, I think there's lots of examples. For example, these stories that come about as a result of the treatment of Indian children in these absolutely schools. But I don't know. We used to get, and I think we still get solicitations from different of these Indian schools, say Montana and places like that. And I don't know, I have trouble thinking about this. Some of this is sin. It's, sort of my sense about it is that 100 years ago or 150 years ago, there were people that were going out onto the Indian reservations trying to figure out a way for people, for the Americans to thrive in the 20th century.
The Western
society.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that shouldn't have been done the way it was.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, the other part of that is that there were some well-meaning intentions involved in that. And the result of it all, well, I don't know what the result of it all, for some people it was quite bad.
But you have stumbled upon one of the great debates of philosophy and ethics, which is, could good intentions be sinful? And again, I'm with you, right? This is one of the tough things for me, being a millennial and navigating the world, is I'm right on that boundary line between just, trusting institutions with my whole heart and being suspicious of it. One of the things that I've witnessed is looking back on and critiquing the actions of our predecessors and wanting to replace a lot of those images with ones that are more palatable. So, like, for example, I'm not bringing this up to critique, just an example that happened near me. Woodrow Wilson High School changed its name to Ivy Wells. Okay? Woodrow Wilson, white man, president, complicated figure, like so many presidents are, like so many human beings are. Ivy Wells, a civil rights advocate from the 1920s, 30s, I want to remember. Inspirational figure. Okay? Nothing wrong with that. It was student-led, which is how it should be. One of the tough things is, does that mean that that everybody that existed before our period of enlightenment is just bad, right? Again, looking back in the past, the actions that our predecessors did. And this is kind of an important thing, because this is, for me, a core Lutheran idea, is that we can look on that and say, yeah, I think that, by and large, there were people that had good intents, wanting native peoples to be able to participate in the world that was coming. The complex part of that, and this is, again, from an enlightened perspective 150 years later, is we realize the inherent sin in believing that our way of living is inherently better than their way of living, and that trying to pull them into our world to make them better, more again, to Christianize them, to save their souls a lot of the time. Now, again, from the perspective of the pastor or whatever, the school 150 years ago, I don't know if that nuance was present for them. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Okay, we are looking at it from an enlightened way. What this statement, I think, is calling us to is not to condemn, but to say, you know what? The church is fallible, and that it's not just the state. And even though we as church are called with this responsibility towards the state, towards citizens, towards God's creation, we can screw up too. Does that make sense? It's not necessarily saying that we're bad or evil, but it's saying we can do evil, even when we intend good. It's like Paul saying, I do the very thing I do not want to do. Jim?
Yeah, it's a fine line of, we are the hands of God.
Yeah, for better or worse.
And it gets into the why and what we do things.
Yeah.
The why we did that, maybe looking back now, the why wasn't justified for what we did. But I think we all walk that. We are God's hands every day.
Yeah.
What is being asked?
When I would say specifically for me too, the grace of forgiveness, right? This is going to lead to a much longer conversation, which I want to read a couple more articles, but let's bring this up in two weeks, is understanding this corporate responsibility for the wrongs that we do, right? To people within our communities, to people outside of our communities, not knowing who's neighbor and wanting to draw the line on who's neighbor, because it's hard for us to understand these people that are different from us as us. That is humanity, right? That is, when we say sinfulness, we often, it has been characterized, sin has often been characterized as the bad things that we do. More a Lutheran understanding of that is to say that sin is inherent to having free will. And again, the way that these articles are drawing us forward is saying, and we're living toward the now but not yet. So we understand that we're fallible, that we're not perfect, we're going to screw up, we're going to leave people out, we're going to harm people. But we are constantly striving toward the now and the not yet. So we never say, well, it's good enough the way that it is. Right? I don't know. Kind of working my way through it. Susan?
That's why it seems so terrible to alter history books.
I agree.
And, to
I'm full agreement.
acknowledging this, telling it like it was.
Yeah.
And accepting that, that things happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I actually think, well, and this is a completely different conversation, but one of my pushbacks against removing, again, I'm not sure we necessarily need statutes to property league, okay? Let me just come out there, okay? But one of the losses that we have in basically, again, it's ironic, whitewashing the history of the United States is that we forget that that's us. It's a very privileged position to say, well, those white men in that time, they did these bad things. We would obviously do things different. You live in a very different world than those people did, right? And I hesitate to believe that we as human beings have just gotten progressively kinder and more compassionate as time has gone on. No, we pretty much stayed the same. The world has changed around us. Yeah.
Now, maybe this is just part of it, because this is, we're a church institution. But if you look at that sentence, Article 7,
Yeah,
it says that Christians and Christian church structures too are subject to sin.
yeah.
And the word sin,
It's triggering something for you.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, man, there was some deliberate action
Yeah.
that was taken, and they knew at the time that this was the wrong thing to do.
No.
That's what it says to me. And it's almost like the word sin
Yeah.
is too strong.
I get you.
You know what I'm saying?
I get it. I get it. I would point towards the church's statement, when this, Paul, you'll remember better than I did, when it came out apologizing for Luther's language of anti-Semitism and for our role and responsibility in the end of what happened during the Nazi regime, right? Because Martin Luther's words were used as justification for what happened during the Nazi regime. Okay? So the ELCA issued a statement, was it the 90s?
It was early 90s.
Early 90s, apologizing for it. And again, reverse, Martin Luther did say some pretty bad stuff. To contextualize it, all of Christendom was anti-Semitic. Luther wasn't an anomaly. It's bad. We studied this history. It's been bad the entire time. Like, anti-Semitism has been rife throughout Christian spaces. The moment Constantine took over, all the way up until the modern era. So the single out Luther is a little bit unfair, but also he was a prominent voice of authority and was the founder, well, at least the originator of the Protestant movement, right? So we are saying, we didn't do that, and we did. And we're going to bear responsibility for it. It's complicated. Oh, yeah. Susan and Kit and Paul.
In the creed, by what we have done
And left undone.
I mean, that covers a lot. Also, I'm wondering what other words are used in the Bible besides the hamartia, the falling short.
Yeah.
Because I can live with falling short, but I don't know what else is used. Personally.
Well, hamartia is the Greek concept. I'm struggling to dredge up the Hebrew word from the best of my That's an interesting question. Yeah, sorry. Kit?
I'll be quick. I know I'm late.
Sorry,
But
you're right on time for this.
you mentioned the Robert E. Lee thing, and that triggered something. It's interesting. We have two sides. One wants to keep the Robert E. Lee up, the other, and remove the slavery stuff from the books.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that we don't need statues of Robert E. Lee everywhere, but removing history is dangerous.
Yeah. And here's the thing, right? This is why it's beautiful, can be beautiful to participate in a nation, is that we get to collectively make these decisions, right? Is that, I come from the privileged position of originating from a Scandinavian family that immigrated after the Civil War. I don't have any roots in that conflict, at least from my bloodlines. I grew up in a state that was solidly in the Union during that time period. Even though I did grow up seeing many Confederate flags in Northeast Michigan, which always confused the heck out of me, but it is what it is. So I have a bias, and a lot of it has to do with the ways in which people have tried to justify those symbols, whether it's the Confederate flag or Robert E. Lee. But this is why, again, it's a we the people thing. It's like, well, yeah, we need to remember our history, and we need to decide who we use as figures that we should, genuflect to, not genuflect, but figures that we should hold up as good examples. Are they all going to be perfectly pristine, sinless people? Absolutely not. Every human being is a human being. even the ones that, I suspect that Ida B. Wells was a human being that wasn't a perfect person. But we, the people, we get to decide who are the figures that we want to hold up. I just don't feel like Robert E. Lee personally was necessarily a good example of a human being that we should hold up.
I always thought it was very helpful when the pastors and the church started referring to sin as broken relationships.
Sure, yeah.
Because to me, that really captures, if you think of greed, that's a broken relationship with society, who
Yeah.
people read it. Or even gluttony, you're hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Or, you know, whatever seven deadly sins. So it's less the stigmatic word, like racism, like saying somebody's
Yeah.
racist. And it also kind of maybe nuances
Yeah.
we think of as, oh, I didn't beat my neighbor up, that was a sin.
And maybe this is something that we talk about in a couple of weeks, because it sounds like it's something that's resonating here. The difficulty, especially in this modern world where we have so much information at our disposal, is that if you look at Christianity across the spectrum, as many Christians as there are, you're going to find different viewpoints on what sin is. And one of the prevalent ones that you're going to see, especially on billboards, is the idea of sin as that you did wrong and you should feel bad for it. And you better do something, whatever that something is, to make up for it, otherwise you're going to hell. Which is kind of the polar opposite of what you're talking about, right? And not healthy, in my opinion.
I just have one basic question. The problem I see with some of this is it uses things, the church, our church, or a church. And that by itself is so broad in context, and yet in some regards it's not broad enough, because, I mean,
Yeah.
when you use that word, who are you not bringing in?
Well, and I would address that specifically. What I think the intent of this document is this is a document, this is a work in progress social statement of the ELCA. When they use the word church, generally they're talking about the church universal, the Catholic Church, small c. But again, it's both a realistic and an aspirational document, right? So what this document is saying is, as Lutherans, this is what we believe. This is what we believe. And this is the now but not yet that we're working towards. And we would want to be witnesses of these things to our sisters and brothers in Christ as well, even those that vehemently disagree with us. And so I don't know that it's necessarily taking responsibility or agency in that regard, but it is saying, no, this isn't just Lutherans. As Lutherans, this is what we believe. It's 10:35. I do want to just finish these last few, and then so that we get a nice round end up of section 1. So Article 8. God provides an abundance of human capacities such as reason, imagination, experience, and emotion for use towards seeking healthy civic life. God endowed you with intelligence so that you can make responsible decisions. Okay? We are to use these through communal discernment to determine what will further the well-being of society here. Now, this is, again, these are subtle but important. This is in some ways a critique of the idea of we're just going to let God decide, right? We're going to surrender our responsibility and in doing so our rights, and we're just going to let God. This is justification for why pastors can now legally tell you who to vote for from the pulpit, right? Is that God is going to tell you who God wants to pulpit. And we, I as pastor, do not want you to use your God-given intelligence at all. Sorry. Article 9, the gifts of God for the good of civic life are available to all people. And the scriptures accordingly instruct all to do justice and to walk humbly with God. Christians, this is an important one, do not have privileged knowledge about civic life, but rely on good reasoning, that God-given intelligence, and welcome the good ideas and contributions of all people who seek to bring about well-being in society. Again, this is subtle but important. We are a voice in the collective of voices that make up this great nation. We believe, an important voice, but we're not the only voice. Pat, and then I'm going to close this
Well,
down.
I think it's the man-made rules that divide us. It's
Every
not
time.
God's rules that divide us. That's what we decide.